right? I'm not in the business of doing charity, but if you could just understand that you can also earn a return while putting your money into something that's going to benefit the community, then I think that a lot of the headaches that are associated with it can sort of be paid for if you understand what you're doing on a larger level.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights, the show to help you succeed as an apartment investor. Listen in as John Kasman interviews experts to help you find the best places to invest, attract investors, and scale your portfolio. This is Multifamily Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you're enjoying the show, do me a quick favor and leave us that rating and review. And if you have not done so already, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Today, we got a good one. We got a returning guest, my man, Mr. Jason Stubblefield. Now, if you're interested in multifamily and you want to review a sample deal, you are in luck. We have a special download on our website of a sample deal package. Just go to kasmancapital.com/sample deal, and you'll also join our mailing list to get tips and exclusive investment opportunities. Again, that's kasmancapital.com/sample deal. Jason Stubblefield has been investing in real estate for over 10 years. He started with single-family homes and has since moved into the multifamily real estate space. Now, he scaled a portfolio with over 1,000 multifamily units in just a few years. Let's welcome to the show, Jason Stubblefield.
John, thanks for having me, man. I'm glad to be back.
Absolutely, man. It's great to have you back. You were a guest back on episode 278 and gave us some great insights on what you're doing and how to find deals in a hot market. For those folks who have not heard that episode and want to learn a little bit more about you, give us 2 minutes and fill in some of the gaps in your background.
Sure. So you summed it up pretty good. But yeah, I started Ready Rich Dad Poor Dad, really got into the multifamily real estate. Like a lot of us got started with that book. Decided to go for multifamily once I realized the single family was going to take me way too long. And then that's what led me on another journey. So we scaled a portfolio to a little over 1,000 units, really found a passion in doing that. And then about a year and a half ago, really started thinking about long-term, what I wanted to do, business practices that I was doing. And that sort of led me into affordable housing, man. And so that's the focus of my business right now. And I'm excited to chat with you because you run a great podcast, man. It's always good talking to you. And I know this is going to be a good one.
Absolutely, man. Listen, great background there. Also a military guy, so appreciate your time and your service as well. And we saw each other a couple months ago back at conference out in Denver, best ever conference out in Denver. And I always enjoy talking to you, seeing what you're doing, the way you're looking at the business and the world and approaching things. And one of the things we talked about was affordable housing. And I know there's a lot of misnomers out there. So let's just start with that. What is affordable housing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different names and terminology that's associated with it. And so the way that you have affordable housing, and that's sort of income based. So we're talking about people who are making 80% of an area median income or under, right? So that's just what we call affordable. Now, within that group, you also have varying levels. So you could have 80% of AMI, that's area median income. You can go 60, you can go 50, you can go 30. But then you've got other programs that can be layered in there, right? So that's where your Section 8 can fall in, or your project-based vouchers, those sort of things. But where we're focused at, primarily focuses on people who are working and just fit in that, call it 50 to 80% of AMI, and they just need a little bit of assistance.
Okay, so when we say affordable housing, does that automatically mean government assistance, or is there a different way of thinking about that?
Yeah, so you got tax credits, right? And so that's also looped in there as well. And so we've started to look at tax credit properties, which is government assistance. Usually there's some sort of government interaction when it comes to affordable housing. What that is going to vary based on program. But the reason it's probably such a misnomer is because you've got all these different programs that fall underneath one umbrella. So if you just owned a property and decided to not raise rents more than, say, 60% of the area median income, you could classify that as affordable housing with no government intervention. But most people won't do that, or they don't do that unless there's some sort of incentive that goes along with it.
Got it. So affordable housing, first and foremost, is income based. right? It's not necessarily tied to a program or government assistance or anything like that. It's really just based on the area's median income, right? So that's the first part of this. But then what you're saying is when you hear people talk about affordable housing, what they're saying is those types of properties or keeping your rent levels at that AMI, that average median or area median income, whether it be 50%, 60%, whatever it is, if you're able to do that, there's different programs you might be able to take advantage of. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, I would probably say 98% of the time there's going to be some sort of government program associated with it. Now, what that program is, whether it's Section 8, project-based vouchers, tax credits, no matter what that is, all of that falls under the affordable housing umbrella.
Okay. So I think many people are familiar with Section 8 and the way that works, right? In regards to government vouchers and things like that. So let's put that on the table for right or on the shelf for right now. When we talk about affordable housing in the sense of either tax credits or other government programs, can you give us a lay of the land of what actually exists and give us some context to the way you're approaching it right now?
Yeah, so there's a need that you see in the market, and it's about how do developers or anyone who's an apartment owner, how do you serve the tenant class that's making not that much money, comparable to that area, right? So the police officer, the school teacher, right? The person who's making some money but can't necessarily afford, or they become really rent burdened by the 150 or $250 increases that you see in a lot of apartment buildings. So that's the sort of the market that we're catering to. And usually, in order to be able to solve that problem, I tried to do this on my own. It was almost impossible. How do you go out? How do you get investors a good return on their capital while not taking rents as far as you can? And even if you do, eventually you sell it to somebody who does what you ultimately, maybe you should have did it, maybe you shouldn't, depending, but it's eventually going to go to market. That's just the nature of the beast. And so having that government, we'll call it public-private partnership, allows developers or investors to sort of work with the government to be able to get a return and also be able to keep those rents from going to the maximum amount that they could under normal market conditions.
So said differently, as the name implies, keeping it affordable, right? So for your working class professionals, you mentioned teachers, police officers, folks who have blue collar jobs who are working. So we're not talking about someone sitting, this is no disrespect or anything like that. We're not talking about, I think people often think of folks who are maybe on government assistance and they're unemployed and they're just collecting a check. That's not exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about people who have jobs, who are not collecting aid from the government, but how do we keep housing affordable for that individual so that they can actually make these rent payments, particularly in a time where rents are going up double digits in some markets. We're seeing rental increases as high as 20, 25% in some markets. So could you imagine being on a salary, working hard, working a job, and your rent going up 20, 25% from what it was the previous year and the impact they may have? You're talking about programs that allow you to continue to make money as an investor, but not necessarily take rents up 20% year annually just because the market can bear it. So with that said, I want to talk about this from kind of that public-private partnership first, and then I want to talk about it from the investor standpoint. So that public-private partnership, explain a little bit more about how that works. I mean, is it just me going into an area, figuring out what the area's median income is and staying within 50 to 60% of that? Or is there a more strategic approach about how this needs to play out?
Yeah, I mean, it is a jungle because you're working with the government. That's the best way I know to describe it. And so you've got federal dollars that trickle down to various states, and then those states disperse those funds. And so there's multiple programs, multiple ways that you can sort of form those partnerships. The government does have their own set of criteria of who they work with and how they work with developers. So it's not like you can just raise your hand and immediately say, hey, I want to do this and suddenly be accepted. In some instances, you can, but that's going to vary about what type of property or asset that you are buying and where it is. So for instance, if you just own a single family home and you say, hey, I want to rent this to a Section 8 tenant, yes, there may be a website that you can just go and sign up on, and now your house is listed for someone interested in Section 8. But on the larger scale of apartment complexes, especially when you're trying to create new supply for tenants that maybe aren't struggling to find affordable housing, now you have to have this public-private partnership. So how does that work? And the way it works is that you have debt and you have equity. And so the debt will usually be a little bit more favorable, but it's your typical banks, and some of them specialize in affordable housing. What they do, though, is they tend to be a little bit more lenient on the interest rate, and they also may go up a little bit higher in leverage because they're supporting a need with some government help. So that's your debt. When it comes to the equity, now the equity is going to come from, well, I should say a portion or a large portion of the equity is going to come from some entity that is looking for a tax benefit. And usually they have, this is institutional type capital. So you're thinking about Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Amazon into the space now, right? And they're sort of saying we could use tax breaks and we could also help in this affordable housing crisis. So the equity will come from some entity like that. And then they'll partner with the government and whoever the sponsor or syndicator or developer, that's the, in this world, they call the developer, whoever the developer is sort of responsible for operating that project and making things happen.
All right. Thank you for breaking that down. You talked about really there being this partnership where the debt's going to be almost like traditional debt, but the leverage may be a little bit higher. Interest rate may be a little bit lower than what you can typically find in the market. And then a big part of the equity is going to come from someone looking to take advantage of tax credits, getting those tax breaks and being able to help put up some of that capital. And we say they get the tax credits. Do they also get the appreciation and the cash flow, or are they only benefiting through the tax credits?
They benefit from all of that, right? So they have the tax breaks and they'll also probably want to cost segregation. Now, the thing that happens, and where I'm specializing at is on the existing buildings, existing apartments that are affordable and preserving those as affordable housing. You also have some developers that focus on ground up, and that's a little bit different. But what happens is when we go out to say we're going to preserve affordable housing, because you have government involvement, one of the things that they do is this program is a 10-year program. The tax benefits or the tax incentive for this entity with the tax breaks is going to last for 10 years. The project, however, may go for 15 years. So if it's a 15-year project, within that 15 years, that's your 10-year window and for all of the tax credits to be realized by that entity who's going to benefit from them. So, with that being said, when they look to preserve affordable housing, it's not your typical investment that you'll see from a regular syndicator will say, hey, we're going to do $7,000 a unit and paint everything. They're really trying to make sure that this project is set up for the next 15 years at least. So they do what you call a physical needs or property needs assessment. And they go through the property and they'll say, if there is anything on this property that will not last for the next 15 years, we're going to replace it. So windows, roofs, HVACs, interiors. So whereas a typical syndication rehab may be in the realm of $7,000, right? These rehabs on the very low side is 25,000, right? Usually they want to see north of that. That would be like a state minimum. So more often it's like 40,000 a unit that you're putting into this. And for those who are listening who think that, oh, affordable housing is just for those crappy properties that you saw with the clotheslines in the back and, the projects, right? So it's not necessarily that. You can really get A-class products that are stable, that are pretty, that look nice, good assets to own, and they're well taken care of for the next 15 years.
So you mentioned that these are usually 15-year projects, right? So 10 years to take full advantage of the tax benefits, 15 years as far as keeping it affordable for those residents. And you really need to plan for any CapEx that the property may need within that 15-year time for period so that you can address it, whether it be windows, roofs, whatever. So instead of going in with maybe a 7,000 a unit value add play, you're usually looking at $25,000 to $40,000 or something in that range as far as what you're bringing to the table per unit for the renovation. There are a couple things there that jump out to me, right? So let's talk about it from the investor standpoint. Now you're talking about 15 years where we have to keep this property affordable, 10 years for the tax credits. As an investor, one, how do you make money? Two, how do you exit and cash out if you have to keep it affordable for 15 years?
Yeah, so there's a little nuance going on with this. And so you have the equity partner who is the institution. And once you have that arrangement, that's where you get into the 15-year project. But those projects oftentimes may take 2 or 3 years before they work out because we're talking about the government and you have to do an application through the government in order to be approved. So when you talk about the structure of 10 to 15 years, that's sort of one way of looking at affordable housing. And then the second way is very similar to what you do with market rate. And so I'll take a moment to just break down the investor on both sides, right? So if we're working with a government, let's just say Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is the equity. How does a developer get paid? Well, a normal syndication may be 2% acquisition fee.
And real quick, when you in this case, you're saying developer is that syndicator for just
Developer is
terminology.
syndicator. Yeah,
Got
yeah.
it.
Sorry,
That
it's
operator.
bouncing back and forth. Right,
Yep.
right. But the syndicator operator who's partnering with the government to provide housing instead of the normal 2% acquisition fee, the acquisition fees can be anywhere from 10 to 20%.
Oh wow.
So it's astronomical compared to what
And that's on the project
that's
or
on the
just the,
project. Because remember, you are dedicating yourself and this property for the next 15 years. So instead of it just being a 2% sort of deal, it's, hey, we really want to incentivize developers to do this if you can get through their approval process. So that's one way, right? The acquisition fee is a lot larger. And then two, you also have, because the entity or the equity is only looking for tax breaks, 90% of the ownership of that property or 90% of the revenue goes to the developer, syndicator, operator as well. So they get the majority of the cash flow. And then at the end of that 10 to 15 year period, there's a divorce, I guess. And usually the equity partner is not really trying to hold the property. So oftentimes, depending on which equity partner you part ways with, the developer or the operating team who ran it for the last 15 years gets the lion's share, probably at least 90% of the sale proceeds or the ownership afterwards, or however they choose to split ways. So that's the incentive if you are partnering with the government. Now, if you are not in that realm, I tell you, it could take a year to 2 years before that even happens. But you've probably seen these deals, John, as much as you look at properties where you see that tax credit property and the brokers advertising, hey, the tax credits roll off and you can now go take this and take it to market. So that's value add, right? You can go buy it and you can take it to market. Usually there's a huge gap there. And if you can understand how to maneuver around the existing restrictions on that, you can find a lot of value add in that. My company, however, isn't trying to do that because the overall purpose is understanding the need of affordable housing. So take the same deal and instead of saying we're going to roll it off or take it back to market, we're going to keep this property long term and operate it still within the affordable guidelines. And why would you do that? Where's the investment? Where there's still value add opportunity. You have to think about this. You've got developers who built this property 15 years ago. They're not syndicators, they're not operators. They run the property, but their job, they're really a developer in the true sense of it, where they bring
they
projects
build
out of the ground.
buildings.
Right. So the same thing, you find high expenses, high operations, and just like market rents in the market world, you expect those rents to rise, call it about 3% a year, even though this year has been an anomaly and they went up a whole lot more. But that exists. So what we'll find is, say the rents are $1,000 affordable, right? We may see, hey, we could still do value add and take these up to 1,150 or 1,200 average rents. And that's still affordable, still within the 60% AMI, but it gets yield to our investors. And oftentimes, because there's less competition, the price tag is better, the cost per door is lower, and you still have the value add potential. Not to mention that you also have the better debt that I mentioned earlier that still comes with it. And you've got this whole ecosystem of different entities that want to see this project succeed. So think about this scenario. Say there's there's an unfortunate circumstance where a property isn't doing so well. Is it really incentivized for the bank or the whatever government programs associated with it to go get the news headline that we're now about to foreclose on 200 units of affordable housing and kick all those people out? No. So that's highly unlikely. And usually what happens is there's more government programs. So home funds, that's a big entity that's in this space. CDBG funds, these are government programs that sort of sit beside these programs. And they also provide, call it refinance money or just additional funds at very low interest rate to help these projects succeed. So it's a long-winded answer, but hopefully I answered your question.
It's a lot there. I mean, you probably have to hit the rewind button at 15, take it back a couple times and just play it back. But appreciate the context and more questions kind of spurred for me. And I want to make sure we can get some level of clarity. We can only go so deep in the time we have here, but I do want to make sure we understand this a little bit better. So to level set, we talked about the way an investor really makes money is if you are the investor, let's call it operator or syndicator in this case, or developer is the word you use. So if you're the operator or developer, one, you're getting paid more money up front because you're getting a higher fee, right? Instead of a 2% acquisition fee, maybe getting a 10 or 20% acquisition fee. So you're getting a lot of your compensation from that up front. On the back end, once you get to that 10 or 15-year time frame where that equity partner wants to get out because there's no more benefit for them, you are typically retaining the lion's share of the deal. So you obviously have way more upside at that point. And then ultimately, you have the ability to take on the cash flow as well throughout the period that you're holding it. One thing that I don't understand yet, or maybe I didn't get it clearly, is when you talk about the ability to take rents up, I get, let's just say, the example you used was $1,000 and maybe you take it up to 1150 on the rent. Is that based on the rent or is that based simply on income? Because the income, I mean, what we've seen is income's not going up that fast. But if you're saying if the property has lagged behind the median income long enough, there may still be room to push rents. Is that what you're saying? Or is it based on affordable based on what other units are renting for in the area?
Yeah. And so in this scenario, we're talking about investors falling within the program, but still having their freedom. So if you want to do a value add in an affordable space, right, I guess your question is, how does that happen? What's really governing that? And so in the example that I gave, you would have an operator and say rents have gone up 3% every year, but they've been owning this property for the last 10 years because they got nice developer fee and they probably went on to develop more projects after that. They're not necessarily babysitting that project or really making sure that the economics of that project work out as well as someone who's in a syndication model who's really trying to make sure that their investors get yield. Oftentimes, in that case, the only investor is the developer. So it's almost like everybody's a mom and pop owner for the most part. I mean, there are some very large companies that run very efficiently, but there's also some developers who are just small shops that do this and they go on and develop something else. So if you find those projects, oftentimes you can find expenses are higher than what they need to be, and they haven't gone up by those 3% rental increases or whatever it is that came out by the government. It's not like you can just determine what it's going to be. The government says, hey, 60% AMI in this area is now X amount of dollars. So following within those guidelines is where you get that delta in between where the rents are currently and where they could be. So you combine that with the other government programs and you're going to get a nice value add deal while staying under the affordable umbrella.
Got it. So the government's telling you what that 60% metric is every year, whatever the time frame is, but they're letting you know, hey, here's the new threshold. And a lot of owners are not necessarily taking rents up to that threshold. So that's where there's a little bit of value add. And then obviously on the operational side, you could be more efficient and effective there as well. A couple other things, but I feel like I could talk to you another hour and a half on this, but I don't want to, we don't have that much time. It's deep. There's a lot to learn. Actually, with that, for someone who wants to dig deeper and really understand his space, what's a good place to start? I mean, they listen to us talk, right? So now I was like, all right, great. How do I go start doing my own research? Google obviously is everyone's friend, but is there a resource that you recommend people look at? I know you sent me a video before, but is there something that people can look at to really start to wrap their head around this, maybe dig a little bit deeper if they're interested?
Yeah, it's funny because there's really not, because there isn't a go-to like a podcast or educational platform. I'm trying to put the word out now, and I'm also trying to share it as much as possible. But if I had a resource, I could say, here's how where you go learn all this stuff at. There really isn't. So usually it's passed down from just knowing a developer who's in it. And there are affordable housing conferences, but not a lot of people know about those. But those conferences aren't necessarily geared to the education. They're more geared to the operation of affordable. So it's a completely different world. I wish that there was something, and maybe very soon I'll put something together just to help share the information, because I do think I know this it's a nationwide crisis, but there needs to be more information out so people can understand it.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a nationwide crisis. We hear it all the time, right? We need more affordable housing. We hear that all the time, but we hear very few solutions of how to actually give more affordable housing and do it in a way that works for investors. To that point, you talked about staying in the deal 10 to 15 years. You work with limited partners as well on some of these opportunities, if I'm not mistaken. So, how do you manage that? I mean, do they have to stay in the deal for 15 years and are they comfortable holding on that long? Or is there some other strategy that you use with limited partners?
Yeah, so that gets a little tricky, and I don't want to go into the depths of it. But when I initially thought about this, the idea was to bring the limited partners on the ride with us and hopefully give them back their capital very soon. So if you think about this is now to add more complexity on everything we've already said. But it takes a while for these projects to get put into the government program. So what we do is we buy the property as it is without necessarily having the government program attached with it. But even though it is already has its income restrictions, then we go through the process, maybe a year or two, of getting the government involvement again. And once we do that, now our limited partners can no longer hang in the deal. Why? Because it's basically being replaced from institutional capital that went on to tax credits and they don't want to share. It's just the reality of it, right? They're going to come in, they're going to cut the big equity check. They want the tax benefits from it. And okay, you've got a large amount of capital to push to these projects. But what we're doing is in that interim, in that 1 to 3 year period, we're allowing our investors to benefit just like standard syndication, increased rents, cash flow, tax depreciation, just like that. But it's just a shorter term, because once we go and work with the government, now we'll exit that equity partner out and then bring in our other equity. And it's not always a guarantee. We're working with the government. So it could work out. We hope that it works out, but it may not. So we always have sort of this two-pronged approach to say, hey, if we just buy this deal and the government doesn't come and do anything with this, does it work for our investors? Can we operate it? Can we do a 5-year, 7-year hold, whatever it is that makes sense? And that's our first litmus test. After that, we go on to step 2 and say, all right, does it work if we try to go partner with the government? And if we get both of those check boxes checked, then we pursue that deal, and that's when we roll out.
No, very helpful. And that makes a lot of sense, right? You protect yourself. If the deal works, great, straight up. And if you can get it through the affordable housing programs or one of those programs, excellent. You can take it that route. Last question on this one. What has been really popular over the last couple of years has been these opportunity zones, right? How does that play a role here when you talk about affordable housing? Because there's a lot of, again, misinformation and stuff like that that I hear about opportunity zones as well. Maybe you could just kind of give us a little context on where opportunity zones fit in affordable housing.
Yeah, really, I can't. Just because I don't know. Like, I haven't
But
really
they're not the
explored.
same. Is the bottom line, top line,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's
it's
like they're
not
not
one
the
of the
same.
same. I'm pretty sure you could do something affordable in an opportunity zone, and maybe that would work out. But
And even that is great info because these are separate programs. And I think that's something people have a hard time wrapping their head around is like there are so many different programs, so many different options that it can be overwhelming. And that's why someone like yourself is a good resource to tap into because you've spent and invested the time to say, okay, I don't know everything here, but here's the area I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on affordable housing and taking maybe a market rate property and converting it to affordable or taking something that's currently affordable and keeping it there. But I appreciate you giving us some context on what affordable actually is and the way you and your team are going about it right now. For folks who want to learn more, I know you said the best way to reach out, you've got a Facebook group called The Multifamily Code, which is not just solely about affordable housing, but if people want to reach out, go to The Multifamily Code on Facebook. We'll drop a link there and we'll make sure we get you connected. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Got to come back to the first deal. Learned so many lessons from just not being around people who were doing it that were obvious to people who knew more. So the lesson I learned was just always surround yourself with people who know more than you.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
I'm not sure if I said it last time, but maybe. But justicemap.org, we definitely use that a lot. It's a great resource to learn about in the street level, on the block level, and not just about 30,000 foot view of a market.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
The Science of Getting Rich. Wallace D. Wattles breaks it down. I mean, it's beautiful the way he put that together.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Lately, I've been more into the visualization. So I'm miracle morning. So exercise, running, reading. I'm not going to go through the acronym and all that, but I try to do it. But lately, I've been more about the visualization. And if nothing else, it really just puts me in a good mood a bit, being able to see where I'm going before I get there.
Give me your number one insight for investing in affordable housing.
Ooh, good insight for investing into affordable housing. I would just say it's a great way to do well and do good all at the same time. So if you can just sort of understand that this is not a charity, right? I'm not in the business of doing charity, but if you could just understand that you can also earn a return while putting your money into something that's going to benefit the community, then I think that a lot of the headaches that are associated with it can sort of be paid for if you understand what you're doing on a larger level.
All right, let's lighten the mood a little bit here, man. You are in the Atlanta area, out there in Georgia. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Oh man, you got to go to Restaurant 10. It is right by Mercedes Stadium. When you go there, just tell them you want the turkey ribs. Thank me later.
All right, man. Sounds like a great place to check out. Listen, you gave us some great insight. Loved hearing your story and what you've been up to. Really helping us understand affordable housing. There's a lot of information out there. A lot of people think that it's Section 8 or it's just straight up government, but your point is affordable housing really is more about the income levels and helping kind of those blue collar working professionals have a nice home that they can actually afford, as opposed to rents doubling or going up 10-20% every single year. So helping us understand that and the way it works with the private public partnerships, and just giving us a little bit more context and recognizing that, hey, there are a lot of different programs out there. So you definitely want to start wrapping your head around this and learning more if you want to go down that path. And I think the big takeaway is what you just said. You can do good, you can make money in real estate, but you can do it while also helping other people and doing it in an affordable way with other communities. Again, Jason, for folks who want to learn more about you or connect, they can go to your Facebook group, The Multifamily Code, and we will make sure we put all that in our show notes. Want to thank you again for coming on Multifamily Insights. Hope you have a good one. I'm sure I'll see you again soon, man. Take care.
Thanks, John. It's been fun, man. Talk to you later.